Camera, somebody's mic is on, which is kind of disturbing me. Okay, great. Yeah. So the disturbance is gone. I am going to ask you questions and I would like you to respond to them. So whenever you're responding, unmute yourself and then you can mute yourself back again. Right? So my first question to you is this the size of the cohort?
Yes, ma'am. As of now, this is it.
So you've had other lectures, but that's just 4 of you?
Yeah, the last time I attended, they were around this much only, like around 8, 10 people.
All right. Okay. Great. So first of all, oh, hello there. There's somebody new who's joined us. Welcome, welcome. I'd like to extend a big congratulations to the first batch of MA Economics at JSGP. So we are really excited about the program, and we hope that you are too, and that together we're going to be able to, achieve good things. Uh, so let me share my little presentation that I have for you, and we can, through the presentation, we can sort of have a conversation about things. I might ask you some questions just to see where you stand. I will be teaching you in the first semester. I will be teaching you statistics, but I'm sharing that course with another professor. So I'll probably be teaching you in the second half of the semester. All right. So let me begin, and then I'll give you a little bit of introduction about myself, and I'd like you to go one by one so that I know where you're coming from, what your background is, and then we can proceed further and talk about empirical techniques and what you might learn as part of the course, moving on from statistics to econometrics eventually. All right. Uh, so give me a minute. Okay, you will have to tell me if you can see my current screen. So, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
All right, and if I do this, can you see my screen? Now, can you see my screen? I guess not. Okay, I think I'll just stick to this mode. Okay, great. So, we are going to talk about empirical techniques in economics. Of course, it's an exciting field because you can use empirical techniques, pretty much means working with data, right? So you can use data to answer several questions that are of interest to you. And I'm guessing now that you've completed your undergraduate in economics and you've decided to do your master's, some of you might be interested in pursuing research further. Some of you might be interested in joining the corporate sector um, or a research think tank. In all these fields, I think this tool, econometrics, as a tool is extremely helpful. All right. So that is what we are going to speak about today, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a background about empirical techniques and how it's evolved and how we need to get with the times, right? We also need to evolve the way we deal with questions and problems. So before I begin, I'll just quickly introduce myself. I am Dr. Manini Ojha, and I have lost everybody else. There is no other attendee except for one person. Okay, great. So I'm Dr. Manini Ojha. I joined JSGP 2 years back in the fall of 2018 after finishing my PhD. In May of 2018, I finished my PhD from Southern Methodist University, Dallas, Texas. right? And then I moved back to India to be with my family. My husband's based here, so I'm currently here residing in Tulip across the university. I have done so I'm an economist by training. I've done my undergraduate from Delhi University, Sri Ram College of Commerce. And then I did my master's from JNU. And then after completing my master's, I actually taught at Lady Sri Ram College, LSR, for about 3 years. Okay, before I went on to do my PhD. So I finished my stint at LSR and then I started my PhD. And after I completed, I've come back and I joined JSGP. And really happy to be here. Have had I think I've been pretty lucky in terms of the students I've got to teach. It's been a learning experience for me too, as well as the students. And I think I've taught econometrics at the undergraduate level, and students often express a lot of interest in this subject, right? Because there is a lot of usefulness, as I mentioned. You can utilize these skills for various different fields. So I'm hoping you guys will also enjoy this, and you're probably coming here with some background or at least knowledge of what econometrics is, right? I'll tell you a little bit about the area in which I work. So I am an applied microeconometrician, all right? So I work in the micro areas. I don't look at macro questions, I look at micro questions. Typically questions that are related to how individual decisions or how household decisions are made. And how government policy might, different types of policies might affect how household and individual decisions are being made. And this is largely in the areas of education, health, um, gender a little bit. So I've been doing a little bit of work in domestic violence, interpersonal violence. So a lot of dynamics within the household. Decisions involving investment into children, like how much education should they get, what sort of health decisions do the households make, etc. So this is the kind of area that I work in. So you can sort of put it in under the umbrella of development economics, but mostly empirical development economics. I don't do theoretical work. I take theory to the data, and that's that's why I call myself an applied econometrician, right? And I'm hoping some of you will be interested in this field, especially since you're in the School of Public Policy. There are always these interesting questions about how policy affects individuals or households, right? So these kind of questions can be addressed looking at data. So I'm going to start the presentation, but let's just take 5 minutes with you introducing yourself so that I get to know the background and I'm able to focus the talk accordingly. So any one of you, I can see 4 faces right now. Any one of you, go ahead, introduce yourself. Any first volunteer, anybody can go ahead.
Good morning, ma'am. I'm Pranvi Singh.
Hi, currently Tanvi, right?
Pranvi.
Pranvi.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi.
I'm currently residing in Delhi, and I completed my bachelor's in economics from Narsi Manji Institute of Management Studies, Mumbai.
Right. Okay. Great. So you must have studied a little bit of econometrics there.
Yeah, I've done intermediate econometrics. Like they've done till intermediate level.
Okay. So there must be 2 courses.
Yeah, one was introductory and then one was intermediate econometrics.
Got it. Okay, great. Next person.
Hello.
Sorry,
Hi.
I had. Okay. Hi, I'm Manasi. I'm in Bangalore. I was born here. I've lived here all my life, and I just finished my bachelor's from Christ University.
Okay.
I studied economics, psychology, and sociology as a triple major.
I see.
I
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm pretty new to econometrics. I've done statistics, but I haven't really. Uh, I mean, I'm aware of econometrics. I'm aware of the subject matter, but haven't really studied it in depth. So I'm
Okay.
looking forward to it. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Great. Good. So I know, where we're going to begin at least when we teach you econometrics. Of course, it's not going to happen in the first semester. First semester is just going to be statistics, but at least from the second semester or end of your statistics course, we can introduce you to the theoretical foundations of econometrics for those of you who've not studied it. All right, next person.
Good morning, ma'am.
Sorry, any one of you, you can decide amongst yourself who wants to go first.
Good morning, ma'am. I'm Shubham Toke.
Hi, Shubham.
I'm from Indore. I studied at Bhopal School of Social Sciences, my economics honors, B economics honors.
Okay.
So I studied econometrics for just one semester. So there was no two courses, there was just one course about it.
But you know introductory
Yes.
econometrics a little bit. Okay, great. Next person.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
I am Fani Datta. I am from Hyderabad, but right now I'm in Vishakhapatnam.
I
Uh,
see.
I I studied in Christ University as well. I did my bachelor's in economics, political science, and sociology. And yeah, even I've done bare minimum of econometrics. But yeah, I'm looking forward to learning econometrics. Thank you.
Okay, great, great. I saw another gentleman who had joined us and now is not visible. If you're still around, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, ma'am. Ma'am, actually, I'm facing some issue with my camera.
No worries. We can hear you, so you can introduce yourself just like that.
Okay. Okay, I'm Lakshya Singhal. I'm currently residing in Ghaziabad with my parents, and I graduated from Satyavati College, Delhi University, BA Economics Honors.
Great. So you've also done econometrics before. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
semester four.
Great. Vani, I know Vani, she's one of our own students. Anybody else who's here and would like to speak? At least tell me whether you have knowledge of econometrics. If you don't, then we can, it just helps to set the expectations right and design the course correctly, right? So if there's anybody else and who would like to speak, please go ahead. I've heard from Shubham, Tranvi, Fani Datta, Mansi, and Lakshay, right? I haven't heard from, there are two Mansis. Yes? Okay, I haven't heard from anybody else. Should I just go ahead? Okay. All right. So let me share my screen again. Um, we've gone over who I am and what area do I work in your introduction. What I'm going to speak about today is sort of an evolution, as I mentioned, of empirical techniques, right? So when we say empirical techniques or applied research or research using econometric techniques, it's basically a skill that you acquire, which helps you work with data, right? You take the data and you ultimately make evidence-based judgments about the questions that you have in mind, correct? So how has empirical or how have empirical techniques sort of evolved? So you see, in the 1960s and 70s, um, when empirical work started, it sort of focused on trying to explain economic outcomes or whatever your outcome of interest is, uh, using a long list of diverse explanatory variables, right? With no special attention to one single variable of interest. But contemporary empirical research has sort of changed, all right? The agenda now looks at if you see most of the papers, they will look at trying to answer a specific question. You might have one particular variable of interest and you will try to answer how that particular variable that you're interested in is affecting your outcome correctly. So that's how it has evolved. Earlier, it used to be very generic in terms of having all of these explanatory variables or having all of these x's in mind, and you have a y in mind, and all of them were given sort of equal importance. But things are not the same anymore. People are more interested in answering specific questions, how a particular policy affects something, or how a particular X affects Y, right? So it's not it's not so focused on understanding or providing a general understanding of things like GDP growth or unemployment. Um, you're more interested in looking at things like how democracy might affect GDP growth, how one particular thing affects Y, or how a particular immigration policy will affect laborers' work wages, or how a particular government employment guarantee scheme will affect household consumption decisions, or how employment guarantee scheme will affect subsidies for small businesses, what is going to be the effect of a particular monetary policy on something else, right? So all of these questions, if you can see, the common thread in all of these questions is that they're targeting the causal effect of a single factor, right? So over time, again, earlier it used to be a lot more generic with just a long list of X's with nothing in particular as a variable of interest. But now empirical researchers, applied researchers are looking for credible strategies to answer specific questions, right? Does that make sense? Right? Okay. But you see, although empirical economics and the research has changed over the decades, over the recent decades, econometric instruction, I believe, has not changed so much, right? You still learn a lot of traditional econometrics with its foundations in, trying to build formal econometric models, a lot of mathematics and stuff like that, right? Which you really can't do away with, honestly. But I think there needs to be a change in the way econometrics teaching takes place also. We need to get with the times. We need to move ahead with the times. So we also need to, I think we as educators need to help you or introduce you to the new econometric or new empirical techniques that are being used nowadays, right? So the idea will be, or at least the effort from my side will be, to introduce you to more recent empirical frameworks that are in use. The questions that we will look at will be more specific in nature, so we will focus on specifics. The kind of strategies that I will introduce you to will be these design-based techniques that are largely being used in empirical work nowadays, right? So what is a design-based approach to econometrics? Uh, Design-based approach to econometrics is basically where, where you're looking at questions where skills and strategies will be related to the research design in particular. And I strongly believe that this is something that you as master's students need to be aware of before a lot of you will probably join the job market immediately after this, or decide to go do a PhD or anything, right? All of these design-based techniques are very, very useful. So I really think that moving beyond the econometric theory, we need to introduce you to applied work as well, and applied work that is more recent in nature, right? And that's why I believe that there should be some instructional change, a revision in the manner in which regression is actually taught. So before going further, what do you know about regression? What is regression? Anybody? Come on, you have to talk to me. This has to be a two-way interaction. Those of you who've studied econometrics before,
We establish a relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable and see how the independent variable affects the dependent variable.
right? So it's basically a tool that is used to establish relationships between variables, right? The while controlling for a lot of confounding factors. You can have a lot of factors, but you want to establish a particular relationship between one. At least the way we want to teach it now is to holding everything else constant, or holding a lot of confounding factors, accounting for a lot of confounding factors. How does X affect Y? That's what regression as an analysis helps you with, right? So regression is basically has been used as a tool to control for confounding factors, right? But design-based approaches to econometrics sort of abandons the traditional regression framework that was started, in which all regressors, all explanatory variable, all independent variables were treated equally, right? Now the focus is more on controlling for a set of variables. Of course, you will want to still control for a set of X variables that are needed to sort of ensure that the regression estimated effect that you're finding of one particular variable has a causal interpretation. So what I'm saying is, the focus has now shifted more and more towards trying to tease out a causal interpretation of a particular independent variable on the dependent variable. Not just spurious correlations, but really looking at causal effects, right? So this idea of causality is extremely important, and I think for economics students, you really need to imbibe this idea of causal interpretation, right? What are these design-based approaches? Well, design-based approaches will, you'll see they emphasize maybe a single equation instrumental variable estimator. Are you familiar with instrumental variables? Those of you who've done econometrics before? Delhi, I just want to know, Delhi University econometrics syllabus, does that include in IVs, instrumental variables? Do you remember if you studied something called instrumental variables?
No, ma'am, it was just still Durbin Watson statistic.
Okay, I see. So, all right, this gives me more of an idea of how to structure the course. So, there will be something called instrumental variable estimators. There are regression discontinuity design methods. There are variations in differences strategies. And again, all of these, along with all of these strategies, there's a focus is always on the specific threats to causal interpretation. In all of these approaches, there still might be some threats to causal interpretations that you are estimating, right, found from the tools. In particular, I would like to direct you to something called the Furious Five of econometric techniques, right? And this is a term that is coined by Angrist and Pischke in their book Mastering Metrics, right? So you should keep an eye out for these Furious Five techniques for econometrics that are being increasingly used. And one is, of course, regression. Then there are randomized trials. Think Nobel Prize. This is what Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo were awarded the Nobel Prize for their randomized control trials. Then there is the instrumental variable technique that I talked about. There's something called a regression discontinuity design, and there is also something called difference in differences. These are extremely useful for evaluating policy impacts. All right. So let's say a difference in difference can be used to evaluate how a policy affects some variable, right? So think of a policy, think of a question and of interest to you. Is there any policy and any outcome variable that might be of interest to you? Or yesterday I was talking to students and somebody said, well, it might be interesting to find out what is the effect of the lockdown on domestic violence, right? There are reports out there that have said that with the lockdown, the incidence of domestic violence has increased, right? Now, difference in differences strategy and regression discontinuity design can actually be used to address a question like this. What you'll need is, so lockdown happened at a particular time period, right? You will need data before this and after the lockdown, right? And using the data before and after this particular time period, these techniques help you determine what the causal effect of this lockdown was on your outcome variables of interest, right? Here it being domestic violence. Similarly, as I said, an employment policy of the government or a health insurance given by the government. How does health insurance affect health outcomes, or how do employment policies affect consumption expenditure? All of these questions, policy questions, can be answered looking at these design-based approaches, right? All right, moving forward. Why do we want to use a design-based approach? Well, honestly, there are hundreds of researchers across all central banks across across the globe, where all these researchers are craving for reliable evidence of how X actually causes Y, right? Not just correlation. How is the effect of X, or what is the causal effect of X on Y? So there is extreme relevance for these design-based approaches. I'm not to say that purely descriptive research is not essential anymore. Of course, descriptive research is essential. You should be able to tell correlations between variables. Even data-driven forecasting approaches and algorithms, they are, of course, relevant still. But why I want you to focus on these design-based approaches to econometrics or empirical techniques is because you, as masters in economics students, should be able to differentiate yourself from others who are specializing in these kind of data-driven algorithms or data-driven forecasting approaches or descriptive research, right? Because data-driven algorithms are the bread and butter of statisticians, of computer science graduates, of data science, people studying data science, right? How can you as economics students differentiate yourself from the rest of the pool, right? And where does your comparative advantage lie as economists? So I believe that econometrics is best distinguished from all of these other data sciences by a very clear causal thinking, right? You're not taught so much about causal interpretations when you're just learning data-driven algorithms or doing descriptive research. But as economics students, always try to remind yourself that you can distinguish yourself from others when you're going on the job market or whatever your future path is by a clear causal thinking, right? Causal effects of X on Y. So let's just look at a classic example of the path from cause to effect. There's this, if you've read any introductory econometric book, there is this one particular classic example that's always given to you, and that is about returns to education, right? Where education is seen as an investment, and how will education affect your earnings in future? Whether increased education really increases your wages or earnings. Ceteris paribus, right? This is a question that I'm guessing most of you are familiar with. If you've read Woolridge, this is a question Woolridge addresses a lot. Any basic introductory book would perhaps talk about the relationship between education and earnings. And this is of interest to you too, right? Does getting a master's affect your earnings? Do you think you should go ahead and do a PhD after this too? Will that affect increase your earnings? So this is a question that's quite relevant to all of you, right? But we've seen how this question is being addressed ceteris paribus, right? Why ceteris paribus? So that you're able to say that education does indeed have a causal effect on your earning. What is the idea of ceteris paribus? As college students, you must be aware of what ceteris paribus means, right? What does it mean?
Keeping the other factors constant.
Right. Other things equal, right?
Yeah.
This is what ceteris paribus is, and this is what we are taught as college students. The idea that other things equal, comparisons are made under this condition, and once you're making comparison under these conditions, you're able to say, okay, this particular X does have a causal effect on Y. Here, taking the example of education and earnings, education does have a causal effect on Y, right? So imagine two students who are identical in every way, financially identical, family background is the same, parental education is the same, the way your grandparents have brought them up is the same. So let's say that, they're completely identical in all ways. One of the virtual twin decides to go and get a PhD, and the other one decides to get a master's, right? Now, since they're identical in every other way, and the only difference is that one got more education than the other, you can then see how educational attainment affects or has a causal effect on their earnings, right? Because you're holding everything else constant. Is everyone with me?
Yes.
Okay. Great. But how do we ensure ceteris paribus in every situation? It's not easy, right? It's a difficult thing to engineer, but it's not entirely impossible. And that's why these design-based approaches are very useful, right? One of the design-based approach is that I spoke about is random assignment or randomized controlled trials, right? Again, think Nobel Prize. It doesn't it's not exactly so random assignment is not exactly other things equal or ceteris paribus, but it will give you effects which are very similar to having everything else constant. All right. So perhaps one of the solutions that you can look at is random assignment to be able to get causal effects. Is not exactly same as holding everything else constant, but has similar effects. Randomized control trials basically at least hold other things constant on average, and on average is usually good enough, right? If everything else is held constant on average, you're fine. So this is definitely a way to go about if you're interested in causal effects of X on Y. But there is an issue with randomized trials as well. Can anybody tell me what issues there might be with randomized control trials? If you've read a little bit about the Nobel Prize and what the what people were talking about when the Nobel Prize was given. There is both a lot of praise as well as criticism when you think about randomized control trials. Does anyone have any thoughts about it? So what happens in a randomized control trial is, let's say I decide to do an experiment on this first cohort of master's students, right? And I decide that I'm going to conduct an experiment with you guys. So I divide the class into two parts, now two groups. One is a group whom I decide to give some money to, let's say 100 rupees per student. In the other group, I give no money to, right? So the group that gets no money becomes my control group, and the group that gets the money becomes my treatment group. So I'm treating this one group, and I'm going to see whether giving that extra 100 rupees affected, let's say, your attendance in my class, right? As compared to the control group who got no incentive, monetary incentive at least, right? So this is how, it's a very, very simple example of randomized control trial, but this is how it works, right? You literally take a little sample out of the population, which you hope that is a representative sample, and then you conduct an experiment on that sample by dividing it into groups where you treat a group and you don't treat a group, and or dividing between several groups and changing the treatment accordingly. But you make sure that nothing else changes for the groups, except the fact that you've conducted that particular treatment. So I'm going to try to make sure that nothing else is different between you guys, except for the fact that some of you've got 100 rupees and the rest of you have not, right? So this comes to close to having ceteris paribus conditions. But the problem with randomized control trials is one is external validity. When you look at a small sample, because you conduct an experiment, your research funds are I mean, unless you have really large research funds, it's not going to be easy for you to, first of all, conduct an experiment like this, right? Secondly, randomized control trials take a lot of time. So they're a little slow to bear fruit, right? And time is of essence. So one is the fact that you're concerned about external validity. You have conducted an experiment on a small group of people, but how valid are these results for the entire population? That is one thing you need to think about, right? Even though this is a design based approach which comes very close to trying to hold everything else constant on average, how feasible is it? It'll depend on how much money you have to conduct the experiment. It'll depend on how externally valid the results that you find are, right? So there are these couple of problems with randomized control trials. They're expensive to field, slow to bear fruit, and therefore you have other kinds of accessible research designs, right? One of them, again, as I mentioned, is instrumental variable. You have new kinds of regression techniques that have come up, many new developments in regression techniques as well. You have RDD, which is a regression discontinuity design, and you have difference in differences, right? So when you're not able to conduct primary research yourself, you can always take solace in the fact that you have other accessible research designs that you can use. So instead of going ahead and conducting primary research, take data from a secondary source like a survey that the government of India has done, or any other country, or a census, anything of that sort, right? Any credible data set which is being produced by the government, one can go to that and use other design based techniques to answer the questions, right? What can you get out of it? So I'm just finishing up and I'm going to open the floor to questions right now. What can you get out of econometrics? What's the best way for you to get the most out of your econometrics courses in the master's program, right? Is to get a really deep understanding of causal links, right? Because these kind of skills are very much in demand. One is trying to be able to understand causal linkages, trying to be able to understand the challenges that are presented when you're estimating causal linkages, the different strategies that are being used to estimate causal linkages. So these three skills are very much in demand. You will see Google, Netflix, etc., posting positions that have keywords like causal inference or experimental design or advertising effectiveness. All of these things are using these research-based design. Even Facebook's data science team, for that matter, focuses on randomized controlled trials and causal inference, right? Amazon, so all of these big companies, right? They are now looking for people with skills that, you know, with these kind of skills where you know, at least you have idea about how randomized control trials are done or how difference in different strategy can be used. As I said, DID, difference in difference, and RDD, regression discontinuity, these are very good tools to learn effectiveness of anything, right? Of a policy effectiveness or anything of that sort. So for Google and Netflix, advertising effectiveness is an important thing that they might look for in their employees. Amazon even offers their prospective employees some program evaluation track, some of these little different kinds of programs. So I think it is important as economic students for you to be able to distinguish, first of all, distinguish yourself from other data scientists, right? Other statisticians or other computer science majors. All of these four fields are using data to answer questions, right? But how do you distinguish yourself from them? By having a very clear causal thinking, right? That's why I keep focusing a lot on causal inference rather than just data-driven algorithms. I'm not saying it's not important. You can still, if that's what interests you, data-driven forecasting, etc., you should go ahead and do it. But always try to keep in mind that you need to figure out a way to distinguish yourself from other data scientists who are there in the market, right? And I mean, that's what the effort is. After the completion of your master's program, we want you to have those necessary skills that will help you stand out, right? So just lastly, some of you, if you've not had too much exposure to econometrics, these are some of the books that I recommend you can look through. I'm not sure which ones have an online version and which ones don't. But you can always look for these books. So you can, if you want, you can just jot the names down. Uh, just out of interest, if you might want to have these handy, or at least one or two of these handy with you to refer to. So there's Kennedy, there's Gujarati and Porter, there's Stock and Watson, there's Woolridge, there's Dartry, and there's Studeman. Which book was used by in Delhi University?
Ma'am, Gujarati.
Gujarati. Okay, so Gujarati is we use Woolridge in JSGP for bachelors. Gujarati is a good book as well. So these are some of the books that you can refer to refresh your memory a little bit, and also to see what are these design-based approaches that I'm talking about, because we're largely going to be when we start econometrics, we will look at the foundations, theoretical foundations. So there's no escaping that. But if once you have understood the basic theoretical foundations of OLS, for example, then we can go ahead and start talking about more applied ways to use OLS and to use IV and to use DID and all of these research designs. So the idea will be to introduce you to, at least if I'm teaching you, that's the kind of path that I envision for you guys, because I think these skills are important. Also, I think in your first semester, you are going to be taught some of these softwares, right? Just a second. You're going to be taught, you have one course in softwares, right? What is that course called? What all courses do you have in your first semester?
I think they're teaching R, ma'am.
Right. So you are getting an exposure to one of the softwares, right? What is the course called again? I forget.
That I'm not sure, but
Computational statistic research.
I see. So you're going to get some exposure to at least one software. R is open source, so that's good because you don't have to pay for it, etc. I don't use R. I use Stata. Have you had any exposure to Stata till now? No? So maybe once you get hold of R, once you learn R a little bit in your first semester and you start with econometrics in the second semester, I'll introduce you to Stata as well. I believe they say once you know R, then Stata shouldn't be that difficult to pick up, because most of them are pretty similar, these kind of softwares. So again, the idea will be to focus on a little bit of theoretical bit in the first half of the econometrics course, and then take it to real data sets, show you how you can work with these real data sets on Stata, and how how these research designs are kind of constructed in these different approaches, right? So there could be 3 or 4 different ways of answering the same question within a design-based approach. So I'll expose you to all of them, and then whenever you need to do a dissertation or anything of that sort in your master's program, and you're interested in working with applied, in doing applied work, working with data, I'd highly encourage you to use one of the techniques that has been taught to you, right? But definitely focus a lot on being comfortable with statistics, because that's a prerequisite for econometrics anyway. As you know, we use a lot of statistical inference for econometrics. So try to be as comfortable as possible with stats. But even if you're not very comfortable with stats, it's not the end of the world. Econometrics is similar to stats, but is also different in several ways, right? Because it's sort of like a combination of stats, math, economic theory, everything. I would highly encourage you to, along with your stats course, focus on the statistical software course. And in your free time, if you have any, I'm not sure how much free time you'll have, you can look at one of these books that I've mentioned just out of interest. Any questions for me? We have 10 minutes, so let's just I'll open it to you guys now. Since now you know the overview of the kind of path we'll be taking in the master's program here when we talk about empirical techniques, right? Any questions that you have in mind? Related to econometrics, not related to econometrics, doesn't matter. You can ask me any question. Nothing. When are your classes are beginning on September 1st, right? So I can understand it's a difficult time. Everybody is sitting at home trying to adapt themselves to online classes, etc. Especially starting a master's will be a little challenging, but I'm guessing all of us are learning and all of us will adapt. We'll figure a way out together. But yeah. You have you're not inquisitive about anything about the university, about the rest of the program, what all opportunities you might get as part of the program. So do you know how many people are there in the class? 10?
I think there are 10 people. Like
10. The class
in the previous lectures, there have been around 10 only.
Around 10 attendees, right? So I'm guessing the class is that big. Okay. What are your plans for future? Do you know what you want to do after your master's? Do you want to get a job? Do you want to study further?
Well, I'm just gonna start. As of now, my plans aren't super solidified, but hopefully over the course of the next 2 years, I have more of an idea. But I do know that I want to get into an investment bank or like a policy research organization of sorts, but I'm not completely sure yet.
Okay, that's good to know. At least you have some idea. Of course, things might change, or it's always there's that possibility that things might change. But that's good. That's good. What about the rest of you? The two. What was your name again?
Manasi.
Mansi and Pranavi, right? Right, Pranavi. What about you?
Ma'am, I plan on working in corporate for some research-based like company.
Okay. And who all are here? Lakshay and Shubham. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Which one is Lakshay? Which one is Shubham again?
Now I'm facing camera issue.
Oh, sorry. Who's Shubham is facing camera issue?
Ma'am, I'm
No,
Shubham.
Lakshay.
Okay. All right. Shubham, what about you? What plans do you have?
Ma'am, as of now, after completing my master's, I wish to take a job for 1 or 2 years and then I would be pursuing this subject further.
Okay. All right. And Lakshay?
Ma'am, after completing my master, I'll be appearing for UPSC Civil Services examination
Okay.
and have kept my option open for corporate world also.
All right. And Fani Datta?
Yes, ma'am. I want to get into research itself, so maybe study further, maybe work for a while doing research, and then go into policy making and research. Yeah.
Okay, great. So hopefully these skills are going to be useful to you. I mean, you all look like some, people who want to do some applied work somewhere, right? So these skills should be of interest to you. It's not completely set in theoretical economics. It's more applied, taking it to the data, looking at real world questions. So I'm hoping this is going to be an exciting journey for you, and I wish you all the very best for your first semester. And of course, I will be interacting with you this semester in the later half. But do feel free to write in to me. My name is Manini Ojha. You can look for my email address on Outlook. So feel free to write in if there are any questions about anything. Um, and I'll do my best to help you. Yeah? Okay, so I'm guessing if there are there more questions? If there are no questions, then
Uh,
yeah.
Ma- Yeah, I just wanted to ask before the class, before the course starts, like what are we, like, is there anything that we need to know from beforehand? Is there any readings that we have to do?
So
What are the
so
basics that we need to be aware of?
you've done you've done basic statistics in your undergrad, and you've also had some experience of learning econometrics. So I think those are the prerequisites for starting your masters in statistics, right? The stats course is also going to start with basics of probability and probability distribution, cumulative distribution functions. So all of that will be taught to you. Little bit of inference. So if you want to brush up on those things, go ahead. Testing, hypothesis testing, probability distribution, random variables, both continuous and discrete probability distributions. Hypothesis testing, and then a little bit of introduction to OLS is what statistics course is going to be designed as. So if you want to brush up on some of your readings, go back to your stats course and your econometrics course and just look through what all was taught to you. You don't necessarily have to remember everything, but at least see what all was taught to you, because you're going to be taught it with a fresh mind again, but only at a little bit of advanced level. And I think it's going to get a lot more interesting studying statistics while also learning R, because then you can do some more applied and work with data on R and do the same things that are being taught to you in the class in the software. So that's going to be interesting, I think. And for econometrics, which begins in the next semester, once you've done stats 1, then you're fine, right? But I did list down some books, and if you need me to show you the screen once more, I can show you the screen where you can take one or two of these books and just out of interest, if you want to read a little bit more, right? Do you need me to share the screen again?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Okay. Here you go. Can you see? Sounds good?
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah? Okay,
Yes.
great. So yeah, see you soon. Good luck. Take some time off. Don't need to study so much before. I mean, anyway, your classes will begin 1st September onwards, and then you're going to be inundated with lots of things. So just take some break before you begin, and come with a fresh mind, right? All right. Looking forward to interacting more with you, and good luck for the semester. And welcome to JSGP.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
All
ma'am.
right.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good talking to you guys. Bye bye.
Have a nice day, ma'am. Thank you.